Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome back to this week's lesson video. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about chords, and specifically how to play chords, because one of the most common issues I find with students, and one issue that I get asked about a lot is my chords don't sound great, or I'm having trouble. I've figured out like my tone, and usually it sounds nice, but maybe the chord doesn't sound as great as I would like it to. And in thinking about it, I'd been doing a lot of harmony videos, just pure theoretical harmony, so to speak. I wanted to do a video that really touched on how to get this stuff sounding good, as I think it's something that can be so often overlooked as a guitar player. So let's just dive right in. And when it comes to the topic of this, usually let's take this as a problem-solving perspective. We have the problem of my chords, or the chord I'm playing, doesn't sound as great as I would like it to. So, oftentimes, because we're electric players mostly, at least most of the guys on here, at least this is an issue that plagues electric players. We'll tweak something on the amp, or we'll tweak something on the pedal board, or maybe we'll think, maybe my volume knob's out of place, or my tone knob is not where it usually is, or something like that, or maybe it's a pickup switch issue. And sometimes that can be the fix. However, what usually throws guitar players for a loop is when none of those issues are the problem. And if we dive a little deeper, we'll actually see that the problem lies in our hands. And note I say hands, it's not just a left hand or a right hand issue. When it comes to playing chords, the problem can lie in both. So what I'm going to do for this video is separate them accordingly as left-hand problems and right-hand problems, and try to do a bit of a diagnosis, so to speak, as to what the problem could be and how to go about fixing it. So, getting into it, let's start with the left hand, because I think this is the most misunderstood, and many people actually don't consider what their left hand is doing. They just grab a chord shape and play it and hope it sounds good. The most common issues I see are actually one of two things. Either one, you're pressing too hard, or two, you're not pressing hard enough, and you're not getting a decent quality note. And there can be a couple of other issues behind that, but those are the core two that usually tend to cause problems. So, now bear in mind this is talking about chords that are maybe a little more complex, right? Stuff with a lot of seconds in there, a lot of clashing intervals, or even something tense like, right? Even using the open strings, sometimes that can cause problems. We'll get to that later. Many guitar players come from, the whole cowboy chord background, where it doesn't really matter for at least the first chunk of your time playing. Eventually, as you get better, you'll start to realize, maybe these chords need to be played in a certain way. But when it comes to this, that deep ingrained perspective or muscle memory habit is already baked into your hands and your muscle memory. So oftentimes, let's look at the premise of playing too hard. What happens? Let's take a basic C major 7 chord, something that many of us are familiar with. If I press too hard, that doesn't sound great at all. Why? I'm pressing so hard that the notes are shifting out of tune. And because your hands well, your fingers have different strengths relative to one another. Maybe you're pressing harder on your index finger and not enough with your pinky, and your ring finger's doing something else, and maybe your middle finger's pressing as hard as your first finger. So then these two notes are disproportionately out of tune compared to the other two. Couple that with the fact that I have jumbo frets on this guitar, and you can bend a pitch just by pressing a note down, which obviously can correspond to a couple of issues. And that's just with a basic C major 7 voicing, something that isn't terribly dissonant. Imagine if it's something like, I don't know, a minor major 7 inversion. See what I mean? It's out of tune with each other. So let's look at the flip side. What if I'm not pressing hard enough? Well, that's what happens. You don't get a note. You don't actually get a sound. And it doesn't present itself so much here, but let's say with some tougher voicings, this one tends to cause beginning chord enthusiasts, let's say, a lot of issues because the stretch is initially quite rough. So maybe your pinky isn't actually getting enough pressure, which means these chords are going to ring, these notes are going to ring, but this one might sound a little dead. So you have to try find a balance, and there are a couple of suggestions I can make to fix that. First, use enough pressure to get the sound out of an instrument. You don't need to brute force it, and you don't need to be very ginger. Just enough to get a good sounding note. Ideally, that's going to help you get a very clear sound. Also, edge of the fret, as always, it's a very common thing we're taught from the very beginning, but it is paramount. For chords especially, you want your clearest sound possible, no matter the voicing. Even something with open strings, right? Even if it's a ridiculous voicing, no matter what chord it is, or even if it's just a simple triad, you want every note to be clear and in tune relative to the instrument. Right? Very clear sounding. That kind of sums up a lot of the left-hand issues in itself. As I said, this is a very simple fix. It's not something... It's a very simple fix, but ironically is very overlooked, and sometimes can be made culprit to somewhere else in your signal chain. Either the guitar itself, the action, the tone, the amp, the pedals, whatever it may be. While those could be aspects that could be affecting your tone, try fix it at the source first and then see what happens before going about changing your tone. Now let's look at the right hand. Many people forget that the right hand is also an element. Actually, a lot of people sometimes have a very good left hand technique. Right? They have a very poised, it's not tense, the fingers aren't tight, they're not over gripping, they're not under gripping. The points of the fingers are used, which helps actually get a clearer sound. That could be another prescription to solve some of the previous issues, right? Even with bars, just pressing enough as you need to. So they've got a very great left-hand technique that's not forced and not too much pressure is coming from the thumb as well. But then the issue lies in the right hand, and it's the same thing. Either it's too loud or it's too soft. So then when you start playing, let's say I have a very dense chord, right? Let's say something like that. And I play this chord very harshly with my right hand. That doesn't sound particularly great. Let's take a more dissonant chord, right? That's a pretty rough sounding chord. Or let's say I just want to do this, get that B in there, right? Or just even, actually I'm going to make it even more dissonant. I'm just going to have a fifth and have that G in there. Actually, this is something I covered in one of my etudes from the etude book I did a few years ago. So that by itself causes a very harsh harmonic rub that can sometimes be a little it's sometimes not really pleasing to the ear. So how do you solve that? Like that. You notice that I'm actually plucking the chord with my right hand, very, very, very light touch for that open G string. So almost as if I'm brushing the string, not really plucking it, if that makes any sense. Same thing with this chord over here, or, you know, let's pick something that's a little more palatable, right? Or maybe just add a little bit more tension. I'm going to make it a 7 sharp 5, right? That's not really helping the chord shine at its absolute best, but that's all I need to get it sounding clear. I can hear every note. Actually, let me just bring up my tone a little more. I can hear every note in the chord. I can hear that separation, right? Not one pitch is dominating the chord over the other, unless you want that to be an effect. Let's say I want the top voice to come out a little more. Right? The top voice is coming out a little more. Or in here, I want the middle voice to come out just a smidge. It's hard to do, but it's a very good skill to practice. And this doesn't just apply to fingers, it applies to the pick as well. I'm usually a pick and fingers kind of player, so the same thing applies. And one of the things you have to work on is balancing the pick with the sound of your fingers, so it sounds almost uniform. This is aiming for kind of like a pianistic texture. Right? So today's lesson is actually quite quick. It's quite a quick rundown because it's a simple concept, but I think it's such a vital thing to understand about sound that it really needs to be looked at. So I would highly suggest you to evaluate where your technique's at, how your chords are sounding. Could they sound better? Are they sounding not as great as you'd like them to? And then make a very honest assessment of, could this be a right-hand issue or a left-hand issue? And don't be down on yourself, don't be hard, don't be overcritical. Just an honest assumption of, my left hand is pressing too hard. And then make a conscious mental effort that whenever you're playing chords, press a little less. Or maybe I'm attacking my chords too hard, and that's causing the intervals to rub quite harshly. Ease up on your attack. Just be understanding of the fact that this is what you're trying to do. So, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.